Hey, how's it going? Dave here, and welcome to episode 4 of my Basic Music Theory for Guitar Players video series. In the previous lessons, we looked at intervals and the major scale and how to construct the major scale in any key. We also talked about how intervals are the building blocks for chords and melodies. So in this lesson, we're going to be using that knowledge to start building some basic chords. Once we've covered that, we're going to be looking at something called the diatonic chord progression, or in other words, the 7 chords of the major scale. So what are chords other than clusters of notes and shapes we learn on the guitar? Chords are essentially a group of notes played together simultaneously. We can have loads of different chords. It doesn't really matter what notes you put together. If it's got 2 or more different notes, it's a chord. The first kind of chord we're going to be talking about in this video is what we call triads. A triad is a 3-note chord. The clue's in the name, tri meaning 3. Obviously we can have more than just 3 notes in a chord, and we'll get into that later. But the notes needed to build a basic triad pretty much hold the most important information. They allow us to identify chords' name and tonality, major or minor, diminished, and so on. Think of a triad as the foundation for larger, more complex chords. Now obviously to build a triad we can't just use any 3 notes. There's a specific pattern of notes that we use to build triads, and this is where the word tri starts to take on a second meaning. We build a triad by stacking notes in thirds, or you could think of the notes as being a third apart from each other. So in order to understand how to build triads, we need to refer back to our major scale. So let's go back to our trusty C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. So we know to build a triad, we need to stack the notes in thirds. So the exact notes we need to build our first chord of the major scale will be the 1st, 3rd, and 5th degrees of the scale. 1 to 3 is the distance of a third, 3 to 5 is the distance of a third. So to build our first chord in the key of C using the C major scale, first we need to take our 1st degree of the scale, or our root note, which is C, and this tells us that the chord is going to be a C something. Whether it's major or minor will be determined by the next 2 notes. So going up in thirds, our next note would be E. C, D, E. E is our 3rd note. Going up another third takes us to G. E, F, G. That's another third. So the 3 notes used for our first triad are C, E, and G. And those notes put together create a C major chord. We know it's a major chord because the distance between the 1st and the 2nd note of the chord is a major third, therefore giving the chord a major tonality. So again, we're in the key of C major, using the C major scale, applying the pattern of 1, 3, and 5 to find the notes of our first triad, and the chord will be C major. So that's the basics of how we build chords. We take our 1st, 3rd, and 5th intervals, stack them together to form a triad. So next I want to talk about something called the diatonic chord progression. Diatonic means, in simple terms, in key. So a diatonic chord progression contains all the chords that work perfectly within the context of a specific key. So there's no chords that drift outside of the key. In the last video we talked about the whole step, half step pattern of the major scale. It was whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. Or you could alternatively say it as tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. Each chord of the diatonic chord progression is built from a different degree of the major scale. So to demonstrate this, we're going to stick in the key of C major, so we're using the C major scale. Like all the musical concepts we've covered so far, you can apply these to any key. We're just going to be using the key of C major because that particular key contains no sharps or flats. We don't want to confuse ourselves when we're learning this stuff for the first time. So if we take a look at our C major scale again, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7 notes. So the amount of chords we could have in a diatonic chord progression would be 7. Each chord is built from a different degree of the scale. And when we talk about scale degrees, we mean the position of the note within the scale. So a 2nd degree would be the 2nd note in the scale, a 3rd degree, a 3rd note, etc. As we've just learned with triads, the foundation of these chords are built using 3 notes. And these 3 notes will determine a chord's sound and tonality. So for now, we're just going to stick with triads and move into more complex chords in the next lesson. So the 3 notes these chords consist of are the 1st, 3rd, and 5th. And to build each chord, we move up in thirds starting from our root note. Or an easier way to look at it would be play a note, skip a note, play a note, skip a note, play a note. If you see my video on intervals, when I said they were the foundation and building blocks for chords, well, this is that in action. Now, although the C major scale has a root note of C, any of the notes in the scale can be root notes. So for example, the 2nd chord would have a root note of D, that's the 2nd note in the scale. The 3rd chord would have a root note of E, that's the 3rd note in the scale, and so on like that. So let's take our first scale degree, C. So we take our root note, which is C, go up to our 3rd note of the C major scale, E, Go up to our fifth note of the C major scale, G. So there's the notes of our first chord, and this is of course a major chord, C major. Now for our second chord, we start from our second note of the scale, which in this case is D. So D is now our root note, and we just repeat the same process. D is our root note, go up a third to F, go up another third to A. Now this is not a major chord, this is a minor chord, D minor. Why is it a minor chord? Well, if we look at the first two notes of the chord and think back to our knowledge of intervals, D and F, the distance between D and F is a minor third. And the fifth is A, and A above D is a perfect fifth. So we have our root note D, minor third F, and perfect fifth A. Onto our third chord now, which is also a minor chord, E minor. So our root note is the third note of the scale, E. Root note up a third to G, up another third to B. E to G is again a minor third. E to B is a perfect fifth. So again, root E, G minor third, B perfect fifth. Fourth note of the C major scale, F. So that's our root for chord number 4. So F, skip a note, takes us to A. Skip a note takes us to C. And now we're back to major, F major, because the distance between F and A is a major third. Moving on to chord number 5, root is the fifth note of the C major scale, G. G, skip 1, takes us to B. B, skip 1, takes us to D. So our notes of chord 5 are G, B, and D. G to B is a major third. G to D is a perfect fifth. So this is again a major chord, G major. Chord number 6, sixth note of the C major scale, A. Skip B takes us to C. Skip D takes us to E. So our notes of our sixth chord are A, C, E. A to C, a minor third. A to E, perfect fifth. So our chord is A minor. Onto our seventh and final chord now, seventh note of the C major scale, B. Skip C takes us to D. Skip E takes us to F. Now this chord is neither major or minor, it's actually a diminished chord. Why? Well, if we look at the notes and the intervals between them, the notes we have are B, D, and F. B to D is a minor third, so at the moment it could be a minor chord, but B to F is not a perfect fifth, it's actually a diminished fifth, or flat 5. A perfect fifth above B would be F sharp. So this chord is called a diminished chord, so B diminished. Okay, so that's the 7 chords of the C major scale. So this applies for every major scale, and the order of the chord types will stay the same for every major key. It's just the notes that will change. So the order of the 7 basic chords of the diatonic chord progression are major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. So now with this knowledge of the diatonic chord progression and how to find the chords of a specific key, you can now create your own chord progressions. 95% of popular music these days generally uses some kind of diatonic chord progression, meaning all the chords generally stay within a specific key. So if you know your major scale formula, tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone, and you memorize all the 7 different kinds of chords within a diatonic chord progression, you can figure out every single chord within a major key. Pretty cool. So we've learned about triads and how to construct the 7 diatonic chords of a major key. The next step is to look at slightly more complex and more popular chords, 7th chords. And that's what we're going to be talking about in the next lesson. So that's all for this lesson. Thanks so much for watching. I hope it made sense. So hopefully, as you can see, everything we've been learning so far is starting to add up to actually creating and understanding the fundamentals of music. So again, really try and get to grips with this stuff before you move on to the next one. It's going to get a lot more complex as you go on, but as long as you master each individual step before you move on, it's going to make each new topic a lot easier to get your head around. If you found this video helpful and you'd like to support the channel, please subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. Take care.